Okay. Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me right? Can everyone hear me? Yes. Awesome. So let's start on time. For anyone who doesn't know me, and it's our first time, hello. My name is Juliette. I'm a software developer for Admios. And we decided to create this sort of series on programming so we can get more women involved in the community. Basically, Developer came out of an initiative of trying to get more people in Latin America, more women involved in tech, and just see if we can spark and give something back during these crazy times of pandemic when we're all just, stuck at home trying to get some stuff to do. Might as well provide some value and see if we can learn something new. So having that said, I will share my screen now so that you can see my presentation. Can everyone see my screen? Nod yes. Can everyone see my screen? No? Yeah? Awesome. So, like the flyer suggested, today we will give a bit of an introduction to how the internet works and one of its big staples, I'd say, which is HTML. Please feel free throughout the talk, if you have any questions, any comments, if there's something that maybe you hear that resonates with you or that you've struggled with in the past, feel free to just chat it out. I'll make sure to read all of your questions later to make sure I answer them. So please just post stuff there and I'll make sure to look at it once I'm done. So having that said, let's get to it. I think, it's crazy because, and this definitely happened to me when I started programming, but it's one of those things when we're using the internet online every single day to get recipes, to know where we're going from point A to point B, who to call, what to do, we're working from there, especially these days, we're living there. And yet, we still sort of don't understand exactly how it works or what's happening on the back. Where is this internet that we keep using for everything? And so definitely won't dive too deep into that question, but I want to make sure that we're getting a bit of a grasp of how the internet really works every time you're going on a link or just clicking stuff throughout the web. So this is my intent of drawing a bit of a schema of how this is, but basically it all starts with us, right? This is the client. So in programming, we call the user the client. And the reason for that, it's because it's the person that's going to be consuming the product, which is everything else that is over here. But the only way that the client can actually get a site is through the browser. So you can see the browser is sort of this intermediary spot, which allows us to reach the internet. Now, I get into my computer, I open my Firefox or Chrome or whatever, and once I'm there, I type in a link, right? I need to have somewhere to go. So let's say I put in my URL and it's airbnb.com. The moment I start going to airbnb.com, at that point, my browser starts working. So what it's basically going to be doing is that it's going to be sending with that address that I just sent it. It's going to be looking for a file in my server and it's going to be returning it. So you can understand this as sort of me requesting a document from Uber or from one of these errand applications that exist these days. I'm basically telling me, hey, browser, can you just fetch me my file that's called airbnb.com? And so what my browser is going to do, it's going to use the protocol HTTP, and it's going to request that file. But where is it going to request it? How does my browser know where to go? And the only reason why it knows where to go is because of that link that I provided. That link is the address to where my browser needs to find that information within my huge city of data centers and servers all around the world. And just a bit of a parenthesis here, the word server, at least for me when I started, it was very intimidating because I was used to thinking of computers and I understood the internet. But what's the difference there between a server and the internet and computer? Like I didn't quite understand that relationship. And if you're sort of similar to me in that sense, I think the easiest way to understand a server is just a computer somewhere else in the planet. And the reason why this is useful rather than the server being my computer is because I can store a bunch of stuff in someone else's computer and just fetch it whenever I need. So it's sort of like, well, how we're used to thinking of the cloud, right? It's something that exists elsewhere that I'm just tapping onto and sending it onto my computer so that I don't waste my precious data space storage, which is more relevant and important than ever as we consume and just really create more data. So having that said, and if that's somewhat confusing, please feel free to leave your questions on the chat there. But what the browser is going to be doing is going to be looking for a file in that server, running some crazy algorithms or computations in there, and then it's always going to return it in the same formats. And these formats will be HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and then we have some extra ones like JSON, which is what we talked about last episode on APIs, and there's some other crazy, funky stuff like that. So having a bit of this image in mind, another thing that I want to point out is this baby over here, which is the database. Now, database is something we keep hearing about. Data is everything. The more data you have, the better your website will be, la, la, la. And honestly, it's sort of true, right? Data is what's going to be driving our decisions today and in the future. And the reason for that is because of this algorithm here. So whenever you make the request to Airbnb.com, your browser is actually going to be sending more information than just that URL. So you can imagine the Uber guy having a bit of a backpack with like extra information that it wants to reach the server. And this can be maybe the browser that you're using, the device that you're using. Maybe it's going to be something more profound like your username or your behavior in the past. So with that information, your server can now store that in a database somewhere to be used later, or it can use that information to retrieve information from your database, store it back, give it back to the server, have the server run some crazy algorithm, and then output that nice file like, hey, Juliette, I know today is your birthday. You're rocking it, la, la, la. So that I feel that that company worked exactly for me and was tailor-made what I was just seeing. And that really is the power of the database and data, is that you're allowed to connect this transcendent, inhuman thing that's the internet, and sort of have it be more related to humans and the client, who's ultimately then going to be spreading out the vibes about everything that they just learned online. So that's a bit of an overview of what's happening, every time you click on a site. But then we get to a second question, which is, are all sites the same? Right? Because for a user, from a client perspective, I'm just getting online and I'm seeing websites. But what's the difference then between a website and a web app? Is there even such a difference? And I think one of the most important things to keep in mind here is this drawing that I was showing you before about the server running some computations. So the perfect example for a website, for example, is whenever you're accessing a restaurant site. So let's say you're hungry, you want some pizza, you go into pizzahut.com, and by that point you get maybe like a gallery, you can see some pictures, you can see a menu, but it's all sort of static information, right? This is information that's not changing. You can access that same site in a few months and it's probably going to be the same. And at that point, you know that you're not having to log into your application or even contribute to it in some sense. So you can think of a website as usually being handled by merely HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, which means that your browser is going to be the one dealing with all of it. It's not really going to be your server that's going to be running any computations. So at that point, you run into web apps. And this is what I said the real difference here is that when you're talking about a web app, we're talking about Facebook, Google, Instagram, Uber. It's all of these platforms where you actually are interacting, you're contributing, you're creating content, you're paying, you're giving information back. And whenever you're running that, then you need a server-side language. So for a web application, you're usually always going to need a server-side language. And whenever you're dealing about a website, you can use a client side, which are the front end. And this is the real division that you might often hear when you're Googling like how to learn to code or what to do. So usually it'll go in between front end or back end. And the real distinction is here, is who is handling your code? Is it on the client side or is it on the server side? Now, just to give you some perspective in case you've been researching through this, these are what we know as like Java, Python, Ruby, PHP, Go, Swift. We can talk about tons of others more. And the interesting thing here is that for years, developers have been trying to sort of create this balance between the two, where you have a client-side space that's dealing with data and passing data through screens and passing data through information. But you don't want to be doing it on the server side because it's a lot more expensive. That means that you need someone else's computer to be running that, someone else's space, some other computations. If you have it on the client side, it's your computer running it. So for years, developers have been trying to find this linkage or this balance. And that's when the front-end frameworks were born. Now, I don't want to dive in too deep into front-end frameworks. They can get very complex very fast, but just know that they're this sort of in-between of the server-side languages and front-end languages where you're able to pass data, but have it all be sent in the browser. Now, this is a bit of an overview, but I think the most interesting thing here is the baby called JavaScript. And if you've ever Googled how to code online, you've probably heard about JavaScript. Or even before, if you've been on the internet for a while now, you probably remember getting some flashes and alerts before in time where they would said like, you need to download JavaScript or download Flash, download Java, la, la, la. And so the real beauty about JavaScript is that it's the only programming language that it can be used on both ends. So it can be used as a front-end language and it can be used as a back-end language, which is really how these frameworks were born. Because you can pass in some data that you would usually only be able to do with these languages, but have it be all in the front end. Now, I know this can be a bit overwhelming. I'm throwing a bunch of names at you and they don't quite make sense yet. But what we're going to be doing now, and from now on forward for a few of these series, is that we're going to try to go through at least HTML, CSS, and JavaScript on the front end and get some fun with JavaScript passing information around. So, another interesting thing is that usually we also hear, when we're starting to create our own website, we also hear about these things called content management systems. Now, you might know them more as like Wix, WordPress, Squarespace, Shopify. And you see that you can do websites in other ways that are not code. So why bother? And it's honestly a fair question. The thing here is that these platforms work at sort of a higher level of abstraction. So what that means is that by you doing the dragging and dropping around, these platforms are basically generating the code for you. And don't get me wrong, this is great and very useful for a lot of things. If you're trying to get something out fast, if you want to have maybe someone else's design because you're not a designer, you don't want to get too much caught up in that, or even if you want to have sort of like an admin platform where the client might be able to use it easier. These platforms are really good and they serve a purpose. But especially as your business starts growing, you might sort of hit that roadblock where you can't move forward because you're too based off of the template that these platforms inevitably give you. So I just wanted to point this out because I think there's often this confusion where like, if I can build a website with WordPress, then why would I need to learn to code? And I think oftentimes is that question of like, why do you want to learn to code? That might really sort of drive the path on which way to take. Now, having that said, let's play with some languages. So the first thing we're going to talk about is when we're trying to build a website is HTML, right? So HTML will be sort of that entry point for the user when you get into it, for the browser when you get into that page. Now, you can understand a website as it being sort of a house, where if you're inside of the house, you want to definitely make sure that your walls are well set up. They're going to be holding you still. They're not going to crumble. Nothing's going to fall on top of you. And HTML builds that structure. Okay, HTML is sort of those hard columns and walls that are going to prevent everything from crawling down. So having a good HTML structure will save you hours and hours and hours of debugging later, which is why it's so important, and it's what we're going to see today. Now, even if I have that beautifully well set up walls and columns, I still don't want to live there, right? That doesn't seem like a pleasant place to stay. So whenever you want to add some design to it so that it's pleasant to the eye, that's when we get into CSS. And CSS basically means cascading style sheets, because you'll be adding on a style sheet to those walls so you can decorate your house so that it's as cozy and as pleasant as your users want it to be. Now, let me make a stop here, because just with HTML and CSS, you can make a website. Honestly, that is all you need. But who wouldn't want to have that button, that control that all of a sudden brings down the curtains or makes you coffee when you wake up at night or shuts the door or la la la, right? And whenever you're adding on those extra animations onto your page, that's when you're going to be using some JavaScript. So you don't necessarily need it, but you're probably used to seeing it around every time you're online. So it looks like maybe a drop down that whenever you click on something, or an animation that comes through, or a text that changes color whenever you scroll down, or a screen that changes. So whenever you're seeing that funky behavior that is not just like a static page, that's usually when you're seeing JavaScript. Now, I added in this extra little component in here versus Java, because this is a very common misconception that I know at least I had when I started learning. And this is because JavaScript is actually comes from Java, but they are entirely different things. So a little bit of a short internet story. When the internet started, you had Java as the core backend language of the day, so working on the server. And at that time, the only browser was, I think it was Netscape, and you had a few other smaller ones, but Netscape was the one that was gaining the most popularity. Now, bear in mind, this was the time when people thought that those who went online were the anarchists, the homicides, the porn stars, you know, the crazy people are the only people who would allow this open free space to exist. And so as Netscape started getting more and more followers, Microsoft was like, what? No, I gotta level up to that. We're not gonna let this win. And so that's when they created Internet Explorer. But as they built Internet Explorer, Netscape needed some competitive advantage. So Netscape decided to build a front-end companion to Java so that they could have the internet be more interactive. So this guy built JavaScript in a weekend, okay? Which when you learn JavaScript, you will see the consequences of that. But basically, he built this website in a weekend, and it became so popular that eventually Internet Explorer, Microsoft invested all the money in there, Netscape died, and as a sort of revenge, they made JavaScript open source, and that was the end. Once they made it open source, everyone grabbed it, and now JavaScript is just all over the place, and it has like too many iterations. But I just wanted to add this in because I think it's often a misconception, whether they're the same, whether they're different, where to start. And definitely if you're thinking of going between JavaScript and Java, I think it's a fair assumption to say to go JavaScript. Okay, now, having that said, let the HTML girls begin. We're going to be talking now a bit of a deeper dive into what HTML is, how it works, what it does, etc. And the cool thing about it is that its syntax is the same everywhere. It doesn't matter what you're trying to do, the syntax will be the same. Now, what does that mean? It means that you will have a first tag, which is your initial tag, which is what you're actually trying to show. This can be a text, this can be an image, this can be a video, an audio, whatever the user will see, whatever type of thing the user will see. Then you have an attribute, which is sort of like adjectives, right? So if we keep the house example for example, we can say like color red. It's like, okay, so my house will be of color red. So you have the attribute and the value that that attribute refers to. And then you have the actual thing that the user will see. Because all of this is just descriptions that the browser will understand, but the user will only see what you have inside of this. So if we take this example, this here is an anchor tag, which is a link, in which we have the link where it's going to take you to, and the only thing that the user will see. So basically just see a text that says Admios, but then when you click on it, it's going to take you here. So that's just an example of the type of attributes and tags that we'll be seeing around. Oh. Now, just like a human, HTML also has a head and a body, okay? And I think the best way to really understand it is in a human-like perspective, because the head is the one that's going to be holding all of your information of the languages you know, how you speak, how you move, your personality, all this sort of metadata that's happening up here. But your body is what the user will see, right? So it's the same way in HTML. You'll always start with an HTML tag and don't really struggle too much with the doc type. This is just legacy that's been left over years. So usually you don't even need it, but in case you run into an old browser, might as well just have it. But basically you're telling it, hey, I'm a human and I need to have this information in my head, and then this is the information that the user will actually see. So let's dive into the inspector. So for example, let's say I go into admios.com. So in here, you have a website, right? Great, nothing too special. We have cards, images, texts, But then when I go in the inspector, so I do control click, inspect element, I get this funky developer geeky console getup. Now, this is the code that you can see for every website out there. So it doesn't matter which website you go into, you will always be able to see the website's code. But you're only able to see its HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. You're not able to see more than that. So let's do an example. If I go in my pointer here and I select the name, I can see that it's a header 1, which is the highest levels of headers you can have. And I see that I have some attributes such as style, then data string, original size, and then I have what the user actually sees, which is Admios. Now let's say here I say, Juliette, hello, and I press enter. All of a sudden, my title changes. So what just happened? And this is the beauty of the browser, is that the browser is allowing us to see everything, and we can change it in here. This is our code, exactly as we would see it on our HTML document, but it's only for me, which means that the moment I reload, my browser is going to go into that server, find that file, return it. And at that point, that file doesn't have that new change that I just did on the client side. Now, just like we changed the name, we can change all sorts of different things. For example, I can change the color and have this be blue. I can change, I can delete stuff. So I can delete even that specific H3, just delete it as a whole. And I can play with it to see how sites are built and how even my site, as I'm designing it, will look like. So definitely, I would encourage you from now on, if you see something that's kind of funky online, something that's cool, something that's weird, just go like, hey, let me just, inspect that and try to find out what's up, see how other sites are done. And these will really help you to start thinking of different ways and how people are doing stuff. But even more importantly than that, what I want to show you here is the difference between the head and body that I was showing you before. So in here you see, if I open it, I have my HTML site. Let me just make this bigger. I have my HTML site. I have the head and I have the body, right? The body is everything, but the head is nothing. But if I click on the head and delete it, look at what comes up. It's like Times New Roman and random pictures around, and my links are blue and underlined, which is so 90s. And all of a sudden the website is not what it looked like a few seconds ago. Now, the reason for this is because remember, my head is the one storing all of this information that I'm not seeing, but that is needed. So for example, one of the things that my head carries is the link to my style sheet. So if I don't have that linked, the website will just look hideous, except when I refresh, it's back on there again. So I just wanted to throw this at you to get you thinking about how the web is actually working and where it's grabbing its code as it's working throughout the process. Now, here. Cool. So now we've played with our inspector. I want to throw this at you so that we can start playing with what those tags are. And usually, you know, I would ask sort of like questions and have people give me some ideas of what they think things are. But I think maybe online it might be a bit difficult. So I'll just sort of take you through it. But I definitely invite you to be looking at it, making some deductions. If I can recommend something on learning to code is to just really be trying to make some assumptions yourself, then Google it, see what it is, adapt it. But the more you're sort of trying to think ahead, the more you'll really grasp why things are working like that on the computer itself. So like I said before, we have the head with the title. Now, will this title be the same as this title? Why would I repeat them twice? It's because this title is the title that you usually see on the tabs. So it's, you see, it's not something that you're seeing on the screen, something that you're seeing up top. And because of that, you would store it in the head. Now, if I go more into the body, I get the main line that the users will see, which is the name of the company. And bear in mind here, in terms of SEO, search engine optimization, and really making sure that Google finds you, you want to have the name of your company or your space in a header 1, and you don't want to have 2 header 1s. You only want to have 1. So the important thing here is that you can always edit the style of all of these tags, but they come with some default behavior. So header 1 will be bigger than header 2, that will be bigger than header 4, that will be bigger than a paragraph tag. Now, can we get from header 1 to header 100? No, we only get to 6. But from then on, the thing is that you'll be adding on your own style anyways. So don't be afraid of playing with it, seeing what the default behavior is, and then sort of adding and moving around stuff. Now, you have this second line, which just as a general online lookout, actually, the second line is the line where that users will read the most. That's where they'll really grab that information of what your website is about. Sometimes even more than your header 1. So just keep that in mind. Usually the sentence that's underneath your logo or the name of your company is the one that they'll actually be kept in the people's heads. And then from then on, I just have a title called featured, which will be the blog posts that are currently on the site. So what could OL mean? It's an ordered list. Why is it ordered? Because each of these list items will have a number, meaning these will be item number 1, this will be item number 2, and so forth. And if I wanted them unordered, I would say UL, so that then instead of having numbers, these would have bullets. And of course I could delete them, but that's a default behavior of HTML. So whenever you're playing with the different tags, always just keep in mind that these tags carry default behavior and that you can change that default behavior, but they have it. So you want to make sure that you're adapting your code to what's really happening in there. Now, for each item, like we saw on the Admios page, for each item, you will have first an image, then the title of the blog, and then some content about what that blog will be about. So interestingly enough, the image tag is the only tag that doesn't have an initial and a closing tag. Why? Because what you're showing inside of the image tag is the source. It's not something that you put inside of an initial and closing tag. So keep in mind that this is the space where you'll actually be able to find the pictures that you're looking for. And then we just close body, close HTML. So this is a very simple structure, but I wanted to show you this sort of put together so you can see all the different possibilities that we usually get in HTML. And there's a lot more. I will share some resources by the end of today. Now, if we have this will probably just display something like this, right? Where we have Admios bigger, custom software development as an H2, a bit smaller, but not quite. Featured, which is a header 4, smaller than my list, and then it'll just go on to the different behaviors. Now, like we said, this is still not designed, so we're still missing that CSS key component. But at least you're able to see a structure that you're creating, and just you'll see throughout the series that just with a few key touches here and there, we can transform that structure. So, before we start actually coding for today, I would recommend that you always make your designs in paper. I didn't do this when I started coding because I was so eager to just start and code. Learn from my mistakes. You don't want to be struggling and moving back and forth when you're already in your code. You want to be scratching stuff down in paper, and then that way you know exactly what you want to code and you just get right to it. So definitely first stop is design first in paper. And for this series, what we're going to be building is a bit of a personal page. So what I thought was just something where you have maybe like my image with my picture on it, my name, maybe some like social media, some like information about what I do, some like contact page so that people can reach me, so a call to action, then some social media sites, some introduction, so like an about me sort of statement, and then maybe my hobbies, right, where I have maybe an image, text, and then at the end just a footer where I'm stating who am I and my social media link. So it'll be something very simple, but if we get through it, we'll be able to see a lot of the main components that are on the web today. So for example, a banner, which is a full width image, or a footer, which we're so used to seeing. We'll be playing with icons, with images, with text. We can even add in some videos and audios. So there's a lot of cool stuff that could be done with a very simple site. And having that said, we'll start live coding. So let's open up. Let me get to my desktop. And the first thing that I want to talk about here is the setup, okay? And actually before, maybe before I start live coding, let me just see if you guys have some questions I can answer so that we make sure that everything is clear before shit starts breaking loose. Oh, okay, so everyone can hear me, great. I panicked there for a bit. And then you say to have some feedback. Yes, questions or comments, awesome. So if you have any questions, post them. I'll be making sure to answer them throughout the workshop or even after, but otherwise just hang in tight. We're getting to the good part. So I'm in my desktop and I want to create a site. So the first thing that I'll do is that I'll create the folder for my site, which I'll just call it developer. Now, in order to code, you need to have a text editor. So it's sort of the same thing as if you're writing an article, right? If I need an article, I need to have a platform to write it in. And this could be Word, these could be Google Docs, these could be all sorts of different Word platforms. So for code, it's the same. If you want to code, you should get a text editor. And I will send you a link by the end of the course where you can find links to different code editors. But today we're going to be using Sublime because I think it's easier for the eye when you're first starting, and we'll be able to see everything that we really care about for today. So a good way to start is to just grab your folder and move it into your Sublime text editor. Now, once I have it here, let me just make this small. Once we have it here, then I can already start playing with it. And like I said, the first thing that we need is an entry point, which will be our HTML site. So I can just say new file, tap index.html, hit command save, and store it in there. Awesome. That should already be stored. What's happening? Oh, yeah, here it is. Cool. So once I have my HTML site, this is a nice trick that I learned recently, is that if you do a shift exclamation mark and press tab, you'll immediately get all of the structure for your page. So you don't have to really be typing all this stuff from scratch. Now, this is really useful. Otherwise, honestly, it's not that big of a deal. It's just first, what it's going to be building for us is an HTML tag, opening and closing. So it's declaring that we're human. You can think about it that way. And then it's going to have the head, which is going to contain all of the information that we need to keep, but the user won't see. And then the body. And I see we have some chats. Let me just open this here. Yes, we're using Sublime. There's tons of other ones. We can geek out about them later, but for now, let's just skip to one. So I have my basic structure, and as the title of my tab, I want to say that it should be called Juliette. Now, great, that's done. Let's say that here I say, hello. How could I see that anywhere, right? It's like that, yeah, that's code, but how do I see it in the browser so that I know what I'm building? And honestly, it's as easy as going into your folder and just clicking the browser. So what's happening, like I said, is that you have your text editor to actually write your code in, but your browser is the one that's going to be digesting that document. So if we just double click it, immediately our browser should show up. And I can see my beautiful hello in here. Now let's do something a bit more funky, right? We said we were going to add in an image, we were going to add in a title, we were going to add all sorts of stuff. So let's start sort of dissecting that, that code. Now, what I always like to do first is just build my structure without any values, without any important information, just building my walls and my columns so that I can make sure that I know where then to add stuff to before it's too late. So the first thing we're going to do, if you remember our picture from before, which I have it here, is that we're going to be adding an image and a name and a button, right? So I'll make an image tag. And by the way, I don't want to see anyone actually writing image, and then having to manually write this stuff out. Beautifully, our code editor does it for us, which is one of the great advantages of using a code editor versus like Google Docs to write your code. And it's that as long as you write IMG and press tab, you should immediately receive the entire rest of the structure that is expected for that tab. So that's very convenient. Definitely use it. Now, right now, I don't know what my source will be, so I'll just leave it empty because I'm just building my structure. And I know I'll have an H1, which will be my name, then maybe an H4, which will be, or let's make that an H2. And then I'll add on my button. So because my button is something that I want the users to maybe like click on, and it'll say like contact me, and maybe it'll lead them to my email or to my social media page or wherever I want it to lead, then that means I need a link. And like we showed before, a link is an anchor tag. So right now it's not leading anywhere. I'll just do it like that. And we'll name this as my introduction. Now, once I've established my introduction, I'll then get into maybe my social media sites. So let's say social media. And this that you're seeing here are comments. The user won't be able to see this, but this is just extra information so that I can see it and sort of get a better glimpse of what's happening. So because my social medias will be 4 different icons, I'll make those into a list. So I'll make it into an unordered list, which will have 4 list items. So another cool hack is that you can do your tag and then multiply that by how many you want. You press tab and immediately you get all your tags. Nice. So once we have our social media, next thing we'll do is that we'll do an about me intro. So sort of that, you know, that small bio, like, hey, I swear I'm fun and I like to hang out. So we'll do that. It should be a paragraph, right? Nothing too fancy there. And then we'll be playing with my hobbies. So this is where it's gonna get a bit more complicated because I'm gonna make sure that I'll have an image, that I have a title, and maybe even a small description for each hobby that I'm doing. So that means that I'm gonna need an unordered list, which is gonna have a list item, which inside of that list item, it's gonna have an image, it's gonna have maybe a header 4, and then it's gonna have a small paragraph text. So you can see how this starts very quickly becoming very complex. And that's why the indentations are so important. You wanna make sure you're keeping your code as neat and smooth as possible because it'll save you hours and hours of debugging later. So I have, oh, sorry, the images are moving around my screen. So we have our hobbies, and let's say I wanna have maybe 3 of those. So I'll do a paste. Oh, I copy this and then I paste it. Why is this not coming up? Awesome. And then I'm gonna paste another one. So I have 3 hobbies here. And then we need a footer, right? So that footer is just gonna be maybe like a P tag with nothing too big on it. Now, if I go into my page, what do you think will show up? Will we be able to see anything? Let's find out. Nothing. See, I only see these bullets. But if I go into my inspector, my code is there. There's just nothing written inside of it. So you see, the structure exists, but until we have something to show the user, we won't have much there. Now, go in here. Oh, let me just, someone is, I need to mute. All good. Okay. So now let's add in some actual extra information. So I know that my header will be my name, so I can just add in Juliette Chevalier. I can say some small stuff about me. So I'm a software developer. I'll add in a link. So it could be maybe like my, I don't know, my Twitter link or something, twitter.com. And then I want to add some social media. So for each social media site, I will have a link that's going to take me there. So let's say Twitter, and then I'll say, and we can just leave these blank for now. Usually you would put there the same as your the link to your profile, but I won't take too much time with that. So we can just say this is Medium, and these is maybe like Instagram, and maybe this is like Facebook for whoever still uses that. And we have 4 social media sites. And then we're gonna be talking a bit about me. So I swear I'm fun and like to eat ice cream sometimes on the weekends. And then I'm gonna get my hobbies. So let's say I like to code, and I like it because I'm geeky. And then let's say I also like to write because I like to also read. And then let's say I like to travel when pre-COVID days. And then just as a footer, I'll say that this page was made with tons of love by myself. Okay, cool. Now, if I go back into my page and I refresh, so remember, as long as I don't, even though I already saved my file here, until I refresh, my website won't display a different information. So I need to hit either this little circle in here or just Command R, and that'll refresh the page. And here we go. Now I can see my beautiful website. But I still want to add in some images. So I selected some images in here that I'll be adding up. But the question remains, how do I take these pictures from here onto here? And the first thing we're going to do is that we're going to click on the folder that you see to your left. And rather than create a new file, we're going to create a new folder. My folder is going to be called images. And then inside of that folder, I can drag the folders the images that I have saved. So I can go in here, I'll drag these 4 that I already selected. And once I do that, and I go back to my code editor, my babies are there. Now, just because my babies are there, doesn't mean my browser knows where to put them. So that means that I gotta go into my source and I gotta find them. How do I get from here, which is where I am, right? It's where I'm coding. So how do I get from here up until here? And the answer is paths, okay? So if I'm here, we both live at the same height, which means that from here to here, I just need to tap images and then exactly where I want to go, which is Coco Jules JPEG. And if I go back into my screen and I refresh, I should see my beautiful Coco face. Now, we can do the same thing for the other pictures, right? So the idea here is that you're always going to be looking for the path of the image and then just adding it on to your website so that your browser knows where to look inside of your file structure. So I can say that here I want to go into images and this is code. But by the way, sneak peek, code is a GIF, not an image, because we can also do that. So I'll say I'm going into images.writing.gif, and then I'm going into images/travel.gif. And when I save that, I go into my browser and I refresh. Now I get all my beautiful GIFs. You're welcome. So I know that this right now, this just seems like a random scribble that is like really oldie, some Times New Roman, which always makes my eyes bleed at least. We have bullets. We don't want to be having bullets. My links are blue. Then when they click them, they get purple. Like this is all stuff that's retro and behavior that the user definitely doesn't want to see. But trust me when I say this, only with this structure that we've got, from the next series on, the next episodes on, we're going to be building some design and we're going to be building some animations on top of it so that this ugly thing becomes a beautiful site. So having that said, now it's time for you to get some working on some stuff because you don't get skinny by watching other people work out. Okay. So the here is that I'm going to leave you in the chat a website, which is just this. That you can access. Oh, yes. Let me just make it linkable. Okay, who doesn't like it? But that's. And let me just mute someone who's not muted so that everyone can listen to the same stuff. And so the idea here is that once you get into that site, you'll be able to see step by step everything that we've done today. So you can just tap in there, follow the steps through, and hopefully by the next time we hang 2 weeks from now on a Wednesday, we'll be able to see your progress, and you should have that set done. We'll be adding some style onto that page that we built today. So that is it for me. Thank you very much for spending your hour, your precious hour with me on a Wednesday. If you have any questions about all the crazy information I just threw at you, please leave it in the chat. I'll make sure to answer everything. Otherwise, definitely do your homework, and it should be fun. You know, it's just get creative with what you can build, and hopefully you'll be able to share some of that with us throughout the rest of the series. So if no questions exist currently on the chat, I'll leave it to you with that. Hope you guys have a great Wednesday, and see you in 2 weeks. Chaito.